Welcome everybody to our webinar today, The Next Frontier, How SAM Professionals Manage SaaS. I'm really excited for our session today and really thrilled to have some industry experts here from the software asset management analyst community to help through our discussion as we talk about software asset management and specifically SaaS within software asset management. My name is Ben Pippinger. I'm one of the co-founders of Xylo, for a SaaS management platform. My responsibilities are really over our product and engineering team. I'm going to quickly just go around the horn and have each of the participants in today's discussion give a quick introduction, an overview, and maybe just a quick background on your specific field within software asset management. So Rory, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. My name is Rory Canavan. I'm the founder and owner of SAM Charter, where we focus very much on the process element that sits within SAM. So making sure that IT and business goals are aligned to SAM objectives, and we have a feedback of continued improvement built in.
So I'm David Foxon, and I am the founder of SAM Beast Consulting. Kind of like what Rory said, really. We do a lot of the governance and process maturity stuff, but not just for software asset management. We do hardware, cloud, and mobiles as well. And yeah, one of the key things that we do is go into an organization that has never had ITAM before or is looking to mature, and we get them to where they want to be before we can hand it over to BAU and let them continue with their ITAM journey.
Hi, everyone. I'm John Tomany. I'm founder of ITAM Partners in the United States. I've been in the IT asset management, software asset management business for about 30 years. That would put it back to a time before the industry existed. I'm one of the authors of the ITAM standards, and well, I've just been around a long time. Right now, I have a consulting practice. I help people to right-size their software installations and spend less on IT.
Great, thanks everybody. I think we can argue we probably have the most esteemed group of SAM professionals here to help us through this conversation. So we feel very lucky to have you guys, and thanks for the time and your thoughts as we start the conversation. So before we jump into specific topics, I quickly just wanted to set the stage on really what's happened over the course of 30 or 40 years as we think about enterprise software. And if you really roll the clock back to all the way back to the 1970s, 80s, 90s, enterprises were buying software, particularly through IT-led purchasing. And that was primarily because to buy software, you needed to have a place to host it. You had to have a data center to put it in. You had a server to put it on. And so everything for the majority of all software is being purchased through IT. So IT really led that process from what do we need, how do we fill that need, to deploying that software within their data center, to supporting and maintaining that, working with the vendors to do those things. Now, as we started into the early 2000s, and really we like to say at Xylo, with the introduction of Salesforce, we sort of look at before Salesforce and after Salesforce for a lot of software. The cloud just exploded. So the idea that you didn't need to host software on your own, you didn't need to put it into your own data center and pay maintenance costs on perpetual software licensing, really became a real thing. And that enabled individual business units to then be able to go out and purchase software on their own. So they didn't necessarily need to rely on the IT teams to support those services any longer. They could go out, identify what they needed, work directly with software vendors themselves, make the purchase, and then be responsible for that software within their organization. Now, fast forward another decade or so, and really we get to a new stage of software that is really employee-led, or a lot of times you hear the concept of product-led growth software. These are tools that individual employees are going out and buying on their own. We've moved from having to have a PO to go buy software to employees being able to swipe their credit card to get access to tools. They aren't going through proper approval channels oftentimes to buy those individual software titles. They may not be going through privacy and security reviews, and they're just starting to use things. They're putting employee data in there. They're putting company information to those tools. And organizations, and particularly IT teams and the CIO and SAM teams, are then responsible as those products continue to grow within those organizations, how you handle those relationships, how you think about those being approved tools for use by the enterprise, how you support those tools ongoing. And that's really the world that we live in today. It's this explosion of software. We see on average companies having 300 or 400 different software titles under management within their organizations, and this has caused a really sort of a massive shift in an industry that's been around, which is software asset management. And so, really, I think a good starting point today is to really help us define what software asset management means and how it relates to SaaS. So how those two things have sort of come together, and really look at sort of the SAM versus SaaS picture and what are the key differences there. So maybe John, if you don't mind, I'll start with you and really look at sort of what is different between those two, and sort of what are the core differences and what caused that.
Well, there's a lot of things that is the same. There's quite a few that are different. I mean, it's software, that's the same. One of the biggest differences, one of the most critical differences, is that everything in SaaS has an expiration date. So you're purchasing, instead of a permanent license to use software, you're purchasing a subscription, like a magazine. So when the magazine subscription expires, you stop getting access to it. Same with the software. So you have to predict ahead of time what you're going to need. Often in SaaS computing, you are faced with multi-year subscriptions. And so you have to be able to predict multiple years in advance. And then the way that the subscription runs, you've got a window of opportunity, maybe once a year or once every couple of years, to right size and adjust your licensing levels if you need to. So it's a lot more difficult to look out into the future and see what your needs are going to be.
So Rory, David, what do you guys think? I mean, obviously the subscription nature of SaaS is one of, or maybe the main key difference between perpetual software licensing and SaaS-based licensing. What sort of hangs off of that? Like what other factors come into play because of that subscription that you guys see and work with your clients on?
You want to go next, Dave?
Sure. So from my point of view, the differences between SaaS and SAM would be that I feel like it's a lot easier to go down a rabbit hole and to really lose control of your SaaS environment, particularly around assigning licenses, not recouping them then when someone leaves or someone doesn't need it anymore. It's so easy nowadays just to go into a portal, put a company email address in, and be able to give access to someone to give the software. Whereas previously with the old perpetual desktop model, you'd have to have physically someone install a software package on your machine or a physical disk. I mean, who remembers disks and floppy disks? Someone actually had to come around to your machine and install it for you. Now it's just so easy. It's so easy to consume. It's so easy to kind of get lost and have so many different SaaS applications out there. The controls and the parameters around it need to be a lot tighter than the old perpetual model. That's for sure, because costs can just get spiraling out of control. Rory, I know you've seen that with a lot of your clients as well, but they just lose track of what SaaS applications they've got, who's got it, and how much it's costing them, because it's just so accessible and easy.
You're right, Dave. Yeah, and that is the thing about, or the primary nature of SaaS, is that it is fit for the agile age, for the agile environment. Its accessibility, its speed of deployment. But we shouldn't forget, of course, that if you are moving quick and moving fast, that you should be every bit as much as you scale up in a rapid fashion, you should be right sizing and scaling down in an appropriately swift fashion also. A couple of other aspects around SaaS compared to traditional SAM as well to consider is that we are, I would say, outsourcing our support and maintenance as well, because if something is going wrong with a SaaS implementation, it's, you know, unless it's you know, your own cloud, you're not necessarily going to be tinkering or, you know, calling up your own help desk to get it resolved. You're relying on the SaaS provider to get that sorted for you. What else came to mind? And also,
upgrades, Rory.
Well, there's another issue. I don't know if anybody mentioned it, but with the convenience, the ease of purchasing SaaS licensing comes the line of business. And instead of IT managers, software asset manager having control and oversight over software purchases, suddenly the line of business can plop down their credit card and have a software package deployed virtually to their environment, and the IT department doesn't know anything about it yet.
Yeah, I think the same, you know, from a SAM point of view, though, that you got the same kind of principle process. Rory, sorry, I'm probably stealing your thunder here, but you've got the same kind of principles with the processes that you need to implement and able to govern and control this. But
Yes,
you know, guys, you remember when virtualization became the biggest thing, and it was so easy to spin up a VM. It was so easy to put X, Y, and Z on. It's just, I feel like SaaS is kind of just the next phase of that. It's just making things more accessible, more agile. And in all honesty, we as SAM professionals need to keep up with that, and also kind of change the way that we do our practices and change our processes and governance to make sure that we're kind of meeting SaaS's requirements, if that makes sense, and that we're still, you know, doing what we do best and governing and making sure we're not overspending, making sure we're compliant, but in a new kind of environment.
yeah, no, I agree, Dave. And it's one of those things that you've got to future-proof yourself as a SAM professional. So just at that point where you get to grips with architecture for on-premise, and then, as you mentioned, virtualization, then you've got hybrid cloud, and then you've got private cloud or public cloud. It's knowing those permutations to be able to manage the software stroke service that you're investing in.
One of the things to be aware of course, is that the whole model of discovery changes. David was talking about how important it is for us as software management professionals to keep up with technology changes. 20 years ago, when we first started talking about cloud computing, there was a lot of skepticism. And one of the things that was oft discussed in the standards world was, how are we going to write standards for management of these systems? Well, skip ahead 20 years later, now what was a mystery to us 20 years ago is plain as the nose on our face today. We know how to discover SaaS products. We can use technology on the network to watch network packets that are traveling in and out of the company network, and we can discover things that way. But even more effective sometimes is examining our purchase stream, account payables, and learning what is being purchased by various lines of business. And further on, monitoring expense accounts for employees to see what's being purchased outside of accounts payable. So there are ways of keeping all of this visible for us. Ben?
Yeah, would you guys say, you know, when you think of, like, a lot of the things that I'm hearing from you is a lot of the same principles exist when you think about the practice of software asset management. It's just you're having to go about doing them in a different way and be more agile with that practice. Is that a fair thing to say? Is that the principles are the same? It's just due to the subscription nature of the subscription nature and how it's purchased and how software is purchased. You have to be more agile and go about things in a different fashion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because you think about it. Yes, it's a different delivery method, it's a different procurement method, it's a different payment method, but it's still, you still need that access and that license to let your users run SaaS or your systems run SaaS. It's still an asset. It's coming out of potentially a different budget as well in terms of capex and opex. So you've got that to manage as well, but still an asset. I believe the same principles, same processes, same governance models still apply. They just may need tweaking based on the delivery and the commercials. But you guys have probably seen it just as much as I have in terms of organizations, like John said, not really understanding how to manage SaaS instances, and some organizations not even realizing that SaaS fits within SAM.
Well,
Yeah.
it's
Hey, David, do you mind just double clicking a bit just on capex versus opex, or anyone on the panel, just to provide like a little bit more clarity for
that's an excellent
for
point
the
that
audience?
David brought up. CapEx or OpEx is the question of purchasing software through capital expense accounts or through operating expense accounts. And traditionally, when we're purchasing permanent licenses for a software product, those tend to be capitalized. When we're purchasing maintenance and support services, those tend to be purchased out of operating expense. And the way that SaaS is licensed, since it's a subscription, most organizations are going to default toward operating expense.
But this goes back to your point, John, doesn't it, about having to prepare for the future and try and understand what your business requirements are for SaaS moving forward? Because when you start an agreement, especially with the likes of Microsoft and Adobe, Zoom, stuff like, and ServiceNow, for example, you need to kind of understand what projects are coming down the pipeline so that you can understand what OpEx budgets to have for that year, for that piece of SaaS software.
And I think an aspect too around OpEx and CapEx, just for those who are not clued into how it's viewed differently from the finance world, of course, is that OpEx is on your profit and loss sheet.
Yeah.
So it gets listed with utilities, with gas, with electricity, with wages, etc. And if it appears out of nowhere, the CFO is going to be jumping up and down saying, "What? How did that happen?"
It's actually hitting the bottom line.
Yeah, make it shrink, make it go away. So that reinforces the need to persistently trim the sails, to persistently right size whatever sort of SaaS expenditure you have in place.
I'll spin that back to you guys then. Because it's now hitting the bottom line thanks to SaaS being OpEx, does that not shine an even greater light on how important SAM is in managing that OpEx spend is?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that this issue of CapEx versus OpEx does, and the multi-year contracts with SaaS, is that your IT manager or your software asset manager now needs to be keyed in not only with purchasing and accounts payable, but with finance and administration for multi-year financial budget planning. Because now when they go to sign a SaaS subscription contract, they're committing their organization to multiple years of financial commitment. And they can't do that without the participation of finance within the organization.
I think as well, John, it places an onus on finance, procurement, whatever particular name you want to give to that function within the business, to gen up, to have an understanding of.
Yeah, and that's
SaaS.
a good thing.
Yes,
that's a good thing. We've been talking for years about how important it is to bring the financial arm of your organizations into the process of IT asset management, software asset management. Yeah. And now there's much more compelling reason, and maybe enough to get them interested.
Yeah, or conversely, actually, because the way I've seen it typically in a lot of organizations is that procurement hang on to IT expenditure like it's their baby. They're not letting go of it. So to somehow include SAM or ITAM in negotiations, in any sort of vendor arrangements that they're looking to make, because they can't survive or thrive on purely focusing on unit costs.
I'm interested to hear what Ben thinks, actually, as someone that's, obviously primarily focused rather on the SaaS side of things. What do you see your customers' focus is? And, when you go and try and pitch Xylo or to your existing customers, does the person managing your tool sit within software asset management? Are they in finance? Are they in procurement? What kind of angle do your customers have for implementing Xylo?
Yeah, David, that's a really good question. I mean, we sort of see it across the board. We definitely see software asset management as a primary user and buyer of Xylo, and as they think about some of the traditional software asset management tools out there, having the specialty that's needed in order to really combat the subscription nature of it, the way that software is purchased requires a specialized solution. And so we'll see software asset management teams having really they'll have sort of their existing SAM tool that's tracking a lot of their on-premise deployments of software, and then they'll have Xylo in place as well to then track and discover all of the SaaS titles that are being purchased, the ongoing subscription side of things, and so to really solve the specific use cases that we've outlined here with SaaS. So we definitely see buying happening too directly with IT teams and IT managers of software, and so we see it sort of in both places. So it also depends on the size of the organization. Typically, the larger enterprises have a more robust SAM practice within their teams, and so that's typically where we'd slot in for the most part. John talked a little bit about how software is purchased today and the ease of purchasing, and really the concept or the idea of shadow IT and what that really means. David, I don't know if you have some additional thoughts there on specifically shadow IT and sort of what you see, and if you have customers, certain clients of yours that care about it more than others, and how they're thinking about that and strategies they're putting in place to combat it.
Yeah, great question. I think there's a fine line and a balance that you have to find within any organization. Each organization is different, right? Some organizations want to be agile. They want to allow their users to make the most out of the technology that they can find to help them deliver a project, to win bids, to make money, basically. However, there are others, and this isn't, having a dig, but those with mature software asset management functions in place, they're far more cautious about it. They will have controls in place to understand why you're going, off-piste, not following the right process, and buying a new SaaS application on a corporate credit card, like John mentioned earlier, and then claiming that back through expenses. We also see people using their own credit cards because the company credit card's been blocked to still buy it because they're, again, not following the right processes. So I think it can be far too easy to buy SaaS applications if your organization hasn't implemented SAM and hasn't got the SaaS controls in place. If you've got controls in place, like I said, I've seen organizations tell their credit card companies and their banks to block certain URLs for persistent SaaS offenders, if you like, to block all purchases that have like software in the title or SaaS in the title or license in the title. But then there are others that have no controls in place, and it's just a free-for-all for SaaS. And then they're wondering why they're getting loads of expenses through for applications they've never even heard of and have no idea what it does. So fine line between giving your users the control, but also trying to manage your software portfolio and not spend a ridiculous amount of money on random SaaS applications. And it's finding that balance.
Ben, oh, sorry.
Go on, John, sorry.
All right. I was going to say, David was talking about employee expense cards and what companies do to try to control the way that expenses are accumulated onto these cards. And that reminded me of an experience that I had first quarter this year. I completed a SaaS optimization engagement over a couple-month period, actually using Xylo, and worked with an organization where they had about $4 million invested in SaaS licensing And of that 4 million, I found in the top 5 products that they were using, there was $1.5 million overspend, just in the top 5. And when we looked at it a little bit closer, we found that close to 30% was coming from employee expense accounts. So when we finished the task, they went through and did a broad wholesale cancellation of most of the employee credit cards in the company until they could get that back into control.
That's huge amounts, isn't it? And again, I mean, without doing a sales pitch, but it shows the importance of having a technology that is dedicated to finding SaaS.
Mm-hmm.
I think just to circle back to your point as well, David, about that you kicked off this conversation about it's worth taking a slightly higher and wider view as to why we have a contract in the first place, be it SaaS, be it SAM or on-premise. We've got it there because we want to strike a deal. We want to save money. So if you've got people who are heading out and buying retail instances of software, they're not getting the commercial benefit of buying under a contract, and they're not getting any sort of favorable T's and C's that might have come from operating under that contract too. So it's almost like people are undermining procurement. And I don't think that's a message that's banged hard enough either.
And often their purchases are redundant because the organization already is licensed.
Or they've got something similar that's a lot cheaper.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Those are all really good, use cases and spend opportunities that are typically found when you go through either a SaaS optimization effort or by using a platform like Xylo that helps you uncover those areas and then go trace those down. And to your point, David, it's tough to get to that level of detail without having a focused solution to do that. I think it's also important to note too that you find those things, but there's lots of things that have to happen to make that occur. So John, to your point, you have to go out and you have to cancel all employee credit cards to take advantage of those cost savings. Or if you've got redundant applications across your stack, you're gonna have to go out and either cancel those specific relationships with those vendors or renegotiate them. So there's some work there to realize those savings, but there's definitely a clear and present savings opportunities once you get sort of a full picture of what's all being purchased across your organization.
Can you also add on to the end of that as well? We're talking about the procurement side of things and shadow IT, but what happens then when someone that's used a corporate credit card and you've got no controls around leaves and it's still being paid for? No one's gone through to track it.
Well, I know what you're leading up to, David, and that scenario that you're suggesting exists whether the employee has used their credit card or whether accounts payable has paid for the software. It's amazing to me, and you just tweeted on this a couple of days ago, David. It's amazing to me how many times I work with companies and I see the HR records show that somebody no longer works in the company, and the IT records show that those people that are no longer employees still have credentials and access to software that belongs to the organization.
Preach, John, preach. And thanks for following me. You are my one follower. I appreciate it. But it's an open goal for SAM professionals, isn't it? It's like the easiest low-hanging fruit. You go in for a SaaS optimization. First thing I want to see is your levers list. I want to see your levers list against what SaaS, your portals to your SaaS stuff, your inventory from a tool like Xylo, your levers list. Let's marry all those up. Like you said, when you found, over $1 million of redundant SaaS stuff, there's going to be hundreds of thousands in there that are assigned to levers.
Sure.
And even in open goals like Office 365.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And David, I'm definitely going to start using the term levers list. I like that. It's got a ring to it.
Levers
I also
list,
like
yeah.
your skiing reference off piste. That's also a good one.
Well,
Um,
there's more to David's list. There's the movers, the joiners, the levers, but that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
all right. I feel like we got another webinar coming on. Well, cool. I want to move on to one last thing on the differences between the two, and that's around audits. Audits and audit defense is really one of the primary reasons that companies start to put a SAM practice in place for on-premise or perpetual software licensing. Audits are definitely different when you think about SaaS. There's more of a joint and shared understanding of what's been purchased, what's been deployed, what are people are using across both the buyers and sellers in this case. But Rory, question for you: when you think about audits, are they still happening for SaaS products? And if they are, what flavors are they taking? What are you seeing companies do, and how are you seeing buyers of software being prepared for those?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're focusing any more on SaaS than they are on SAM, as much because if you think about the long-term pitch, once you get somebody on a SaaS contract, the opportunity to switch to another technology is that much harder. So the audits they're still banging the drum for the on-premise audits as much to drive clients potentially to upgrade or transfer. So if in the event of a shortfall being found on your traditional IT estate, oh yes, look, there's a 7-figure liability here, but we can make that go away if you go to the cloud. Yeah, in terms of audits and SaaS, they're still as prevalent as ever. But it's to get you to SaaS rather than to scrutinize what it is you're doing in SaaS.
I would caveat on that, Roy. I totally agree. But one of the audit practices I have seen in the past, not so much within the last 6 months or so, but is account sharing with SaaS applications. So you buy, like for example, a member of your staff will go out, they'll go through the proper process, it will get approved, etc., etc. They will buy it under their name and their company email address, but then they'll share that around with other people. That's one of the things that I've seen SaaS vendors in particular going after customers to say, this doesn't make sense. You've logged in under this IP address here, but then 2 minutes later you're here, and then you're here. And they have all these kind of, because it's all, logging in through their portals, through their URLs, they can track that kind of thing. And I remember Microsoft, even a few years ago, when Office 365 first came out, service desks, for example, would buy one E5 or E3 license, for example, assign it to a shared account and just give it to like 5 service desk people, having to pay for named user ones. So that's the kind of audits I've seen.
That brings in the whole topic of license model, license metric. And, I've said all along that there is no such thing as a SaaS license or a SaaS specific license. People talk about SaaS licensing as though it's a whole different world than on-premise licensing. And it's really not, except that everything has an expiration date. But what David is pointing out is the difference between named user and current user. So a named user account, David has a license that is assigned to him. Rory has a license that's assigned to him. Ben has a license that's assigned to him, and I don't have any at all. And so these 3 guys can use their licenses that are each assigned to them. I don't have anything. I can't use it. But if one of them had a current user license, that would mean that it's just current, whoever is current using that license. So if Ben had a current user license, then he could use it, I could use it, he could use it, I could use it. David could use it, Rory could use it. Not that they would need it because they have a named license. Another license metric is often referred to as consumption licensing. I don't like that phrase so much because I don't really see it that way. it takes me back to a number of years, well, more than 20 years ago, with a not very popular license model that was called utility licensing. And I don't know if you want me to talk about utility licensing, Ben?
I mean, maybe just a touch on sort of the consumption model and how that relates back to audits. I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, under that license model, call it consumption, call it utility, whatever you want to call it. Under that model, instead of paying for numbers of entitlements, numbers of seats, let's call them light bulbs. Instead of paying for numbers of light bulbs, you're paying for the electricity that the light bulbs use. Or in the software sense, you're paying for the time that you use it and not the instance itself. And so it was traditionally referred to as utility licensing, so that the meter starts running when you launch and it stops running when you quit. And that can get way out of control. The difficulty with utility licensing or consumption licensing is that you cannot predict at contract signing what you're going to be committing your company to. And the accounting department goes crazy over this. They want to be able to predict, well, we've got this budget and we've got to stay within budget, and you sign a contract for consumption licensing, and the software becomes more popular than we expect it to be in the company, and suddenly we owe 3 times more money than what we had budgeted. Not good.
Yeah, not good. I can definitely see how there would be, there can be challenges with that. I think, again, a whole nother webinar topic could be the idea of just licensing and sort of the different licensing models that are out there and what you guys see work well and what you see not work well. David, as you were talking, I was writing down the account sharing. I call it the Netflix problem. I think we all can relate to that in our own personal lives as well.
Massively.
Yep, and I could definitely see how that could be an audit opportunity for a lot of these organizations. Well, great. Well, I think we've hit the points home on SAM versus SaaS, the differences. I think we probably talked about a couple of the topics as we were going through that, just on sort of the current landscape. And when I say, I mean the current landscape, it's like specifically for SaaS professionals. How has this impacted their profession and what their focus and what they do on a day-to-day basis? So a couple questions in this particular area for areas that I don't think we've really touched on yet is John, to you, really, when you think about the SAM professional and their day-to-day jobs, how have they needed to evolve? I mean, we've talked about the differences there. Is the core part of their job different now than it was 10 years ago? And if so, what are those new responsibilities that they're faced with?
Just like the license metrics themselves are essentially the same as they were a decade or 2 decades ago, the core processes that a SAM practitioner is using are essentially the same as they were 10 years or 20 years ago. Well, 20 years ago, we didn't have the practice identified, but the processes are roughly the same. The methods that we use to do them become different. So we have discovery, identification, numeration or count them, and then manage. Discover, identify, count, manage. Those are the processes that we've used since the inception of this industry. And those are the processes that we continue to use even with SaaS licensing. But I'll bet David the Beast has got some other ideas too.
Yeah, I think no, I agree. I think a lot of the principles are the same. You know, I haven't been in the industry obviously as long as the 2 legends of the ITAM sector that are on the call with us. But even in my short time within the industry, I think the way that the kind of day-to-day landscape has changed and the change in the ways of working, you know, like I mentioned earlier, it felt like when I first started 10 odd years ago, that it was a real focus on, we've got one laptop, we've got one device license, it's 1+1. You know, it's as simple as that. You know, for a lot of products, that's how it went. It was desktop licensing, it was per user. Like John said, the licensing models haven't changed, but now there's an extra emphasis on like monitoring. There's so much more monitoring to be done with desktop applications. When I do like internal audits, I'm looking at like, okay, so you haven't used it for the past 30 days, but you're planning on using it within the next 60 days. That's fine, keep it. We've already paid for it. You carry on. Whereas now, if that was a SaaS license, I'm like, no, we're paying for that on a monthly basis. If you are not using it, fine, we're going to take it away. When you want it, you come back through our processes, we can give it to you, and we can start paying for the license again. I think that's one of the main, there's been a lot more focus on consumption, a lot more focus on utilization and optimization of any SaaS instances that you have within your organization. And again, like Rory and John both mentioned previously, because it now falls into that OPEX side of things, because it is hitting that bottom line, because finance and procurement have such a vested interest in SaaS now, because they can physically see it on the bottom line. And that bottom line is so important with share prices, with, you know, your annual results, etc. So it's all about really, you know, bleeding the SaaS licenses to make sure that you're only paying for what you actually need, and then everything you are paying for is being utilized. And, you know, some organizations, I've had to set up reports that are looking at that on a monthly basis. If they haven't used it in the last month, it's gone. That's it. We're not paying for it anymore. They want it again, they'll have to go through the process.
Yep.
I think too, there's with the adoption of SaaS in the workforce as well, and the wider view, we have to look slightly higher and wider as to the principles driving the discipline. So whereas when I started, compliance was a major stick or a carrot, depending on how you pitched it, to drive some maturity in an organization. These days, we're potentially looking at data management or cybersecurity or infosec and access control, business continuity management and disaster recovery. So whilst compliance reports are still important and still demanded, having that sort of broader perspective on how SAM and SaaS can plug into those disciplines has elevated.
No, I agree. Do you know what else I think has changed the current landscape is the fact that, and I'm going to blame app stores for this, you know, your Apple App Store, Google Play, whatever, the fact that people can now download apps onto their phone, onto their laptop so quickly, they expect that within an organization as well now. If they put a request in, why is it taking you weeks to go through and, you know, procure it, make sure it's gone through security measures, gone through legal for T's and C's? I could have downloaded it on my phone within a matter of minutes. I can go home and download it. Why have I got to wait for this process?
Yeah,
Whereas previously, when it was a device license or a user license that was like perpetual with subscription support, they understood that, we're waiting for vendor X or whatever to send us a disk. We're waiting for the license file to come through. We're waiting for the serial number to come through. You know, I'm really sorry. Whereas now it's like, Sam team, what's going on? I put the request in 5 days ago. Why have I not had it installed? I could have installed it myself in 30 seconds. So thanks, app stores.
Well, this is where the concept of streamlining and automation comes into play as well. Then at that point, so you've got to, I think you've got to think savvy. You know, we're well beyond the days of you know, chalk and a chalkboard and pen and paper activity. And I would argue potentially, you know, eking away from Excel as well and spreadsheets. We've got to think about connectivity between
we're moving
systems.
away from Excel.
Are we? Excel's the most used SAM tool, Rory. What are you talking about?
I would say a little. So, you know, like, you know, the maintenance of tracker spreadsheets and license pools in that respect, you know, we should be using the tools that we have in place to do that, and actually hooking those systems up to other systems that could use that data. Not sort of, oh, I've emailed you the spreadsheet, this is what we've got in the pool. You know, no, not good enough anymore, particularly if you want to scale. You've got to get slicker, you've got to get automated.
You know, I
think that's
talk
a good
about
point, Rory.
the path.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead, John.
sorry, Ben. I often talk about the path of least resistance. And I tell clients that your employees are going to use the path of least resistance to get the tools that they need to get their job done. I first ran across this when I had a marketing firm in the 80s, and we did a survey of fuel oil companies, fuel oil customers, and we asked them to tell us what were the deciding factors to drive their decision. And they thought it was price. They would answer the question always with, I shop for the best price. But we found that from the survey that their actual habits were that they took the most convenient route, whatever was the easiest thing that they could do. Price didn't matter, the other things didn't matter. It was whatever was most convenient. And so it's so important today when SaaS delivery is so convenient through app stores and online downloads that a corporate delivery model to deliver software to staff within the organization must become the path of least resistance. It must be easier to do that than to go to the App Store.
I completely agree, John. And I think, you know, Xylo is a great tool for automation from a consumption point of view within SaaS. But kind of to Rory's point, you know, about how we need to be evolving, we need to be looking at automation, completely 100% agree. However, my thoughts on that would be that that's a huge culture change for a lot of organizations that aren't used to that. Rory?
I'm sorry, Dave, I missed that.
I just made a really good point and you just ignored me.
Sorry, I'm multitasking and failing badly here. What was the relevant point you made?
Okay, retake. 3, 2, 1.
Action. Going back to Rory's point, I completely agree with what you said about automation and fully agree with it 100%. And like I was saying, you know, Xylo is a great tool for that with SaaS. But my argument to you would be that that's a huge culture shift for an organization that hasn't been doing that previously. So you've got to be careful and make sure that you know, do as many, I would say shaking hands, but you can't do that now with the coronavirus, but as many virtual high fives as you can to make sure that people understand that, yeah, if you're not using SaaS, you're going to take it away. However, here's the process to get it back. Like John said, the path of least resistance, so that they're accepting you're going to be removing it if you're not using it, but it's really easy for them to get it back if they've got a valid justification for doing so.
You're going to tweet on that tomorrow morning, aren't you?
I've just forgotten what I said. No, I'm joking. Well, for you for my 2 followers, I might, yeah. But you've heard it now, so.
But no, you're right, Dave. But that is always the crux with any sort of maturity curve you're going along, and it's always been the issue in SAM or ITAM is bringing the workforce along with you, and I'm still finding it now in the current engagement I've got. It's that you can't present a fait accompli to end users or to people you're working with. You have to school them as you're going, as you're maturing workflows and processes and implementations. Because if you rock up with a bright and shiny toy, day one and say, go live with that, and they say, no, don't like it.
Well, you have to give them some purchase in the process. I mean, involve them in developing that path of least resistance.
Yeah.
I gave a talk a month or so ago with the ITAM review, and we talked about that, how to create your own storefront to deliver software to your employees and make it the path of least resistance. And I talked about developing the system from the outside in, rather than starting in the center and figuring out how am I going to deliver the software out there. Start from out there where the employee is and get a feeling for the employee's experience. What's going on, that when they push this button, what happens? When they push the next button, what happens? How many buttons do they have to push to get the software installed?
Yeah. Well, you only have to look as far as Amazon for that. That's one of their key messages. The fewer buttons you have to push, the more likely you are to get a sale. So that's why you see all these whizzy things like swipe to buy now, all of this kind of stuff. It's
Sure.
Yep. Yeah, it's also bringing. I focus on product management at Xylo, and it's bringing that end customer and the customer story, the user persona, the user story into picture, and forcing SAM teams and procurement teams to really think of the end user and what their experience looks like, because of all the reasons you guys have brought up around app stores and Amazon and others. That's how they operate in their personal lives, and really the consumerization of business software is a real thing. They're starting to, in their mind, the mindset is that the tools they use at work should act the same way as the tools they use in their own personal lives as well.
And Ben, there was one thing that you said in the midst of that is the key to this, to making software delivery most effective. You talked about user experience. It used to be that we would develop user interfaces, and we thought about interface design from step to step to step to step to completion. Today, we need to think about user experience. How many steps? Like Rory said, the fewer the better. But more than that, what are they faced with? What are they experiencing? What are they seeing? What are they not seeing? What messages are we giving them in the user experience that they're having to get that software installed on their own computer?
Yeah, for sure. I think that makes a ton of sense. Well, this has been, we've gotten through a lot of content. There's a few more things I want to touch on in the last closing minutes here. I think I've got a line of questioning, but I think I sort of want to jump to a quick lightning round with each of you, and maybe we'll start with Rory, then David, then John. SaaS management and really having SAM professionals be responsible for the professional management of SaaS applications and SaaS subscriptions has really been, it's a prime focus of our conversation today. And I think you all have probably seen varying levels of that within your own customers and the clients that you've worked with, where some don't have a practice at all, some probably are a lot more advanced and have a practice in place. But when you think about why somebody would want to start that now, or what would your recommendation be for getting going? Maybe answer those two questions. So sort of why now and how do they get started? We'll start with Rory.
So why now? Because it needs to be done. There is no idea that you can bury your head in the sand and hope it will go away. It will not go away. You need to manage it. What are the takeaway would I give? Change is the enemy. So look at the data that changes in and around your SaaS environment, and apply an appropriate level of management overhead to that change. And that's very quickly going to drive out the use cases that you need to address, the technology that you need to put in place, and also the people that you might need in place, as well as the processes. Obviously, that's a given with me. But that should then flush out. So watch where the changes in your IT estate, be it on-premise, be it in SaaS, and model accordingly.
Great. David, how about you? Why now, and how would you recommend someone get started?
So why now? Probably because you're already spending loads of money on SaaS that you don't actually need, and it's hitting your bottom line. And like Rory said, it should have been done a long time ago. When you first got your first SaaS instance, for example, you should have kind of looked at your SAM team and built the process and governance around it. And also now I think it's also really important because of what the whole world's going through with the coronavirus. A lot of organizations are being hit hard financially. A lot of people are unfortunately losing their jobs. So it's a great way to save money and really optimize cost, and hopefully even, save some jobs. If you can save some money on software that can pay for another, some of the employees for another year, then, that's a win-win situation. And what to do, like Rory said again, Rory went first. We managed to steal all the obvious and good answers. Data, go through all of your data sets to understand what SaaS applications you've got out there, who's using them. Like I mentioned previously, a really open, easy goal is looking at levers, and also make sure you get your processes and governance in place. And tools, obviously, like Xylo.
There you go. Thanks, David.
Yeah.
John, how about you?
So I get to pick up whatever these guys missed, huh?
I expect with 30 years in the industry, you've probably got a couple more nuggets that they may have missed.
Well, we are increasingly becoming a mobile computing generation. Why do I say that? Well, multiple generations. I work with teams who are so young that when I was their age, they weren't. And we're all becoming mobile workers, at least in the knowledge worker industry. When I think back to the Industrial Revolution, part of the revolution was no longer working at home on the homestead, but going to the office, and going to the factory. And then came the information revolution. And our work habits changed a bit. No longer factory, now we're at a desk. And now we've become, can we say, the mobile generation or the mobile revolution? And COVID-19 is accelerating the pace toward mobile workplace. Look at all of us. I'm sitting in my home office. The only guy that's in an office that I can see here is Ben. And the rest of us are all working wherever I am with a computer in my hand. I'm in my office, whether that's on an airplane, whether that's in Milan or in San Francisco or home here in New Hampshire. I'm always in my office if I have my computer. So we need to be able to support that environment. Supporting that environment means forget about protecting the perimeter. There is no longer a perimeter. Now your organization can be spread across the world, anywhere, anytime, any place. And we need to develop systems to manage that. Well, we don't need to develop them. They're already developed. We need to employ those systems. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say, I'll be very concerned if Ben wasn't in the office because his colleagues in the background haven't moved in over an hour.
I'm in my kitchen, guys, in Indianapolis. So that's the other part, is technology makes it look like you could be in an office, which is a great thing.
You know, I thought I noticed that person wasn't moving.
Great. Well, thank you guys for your time today. I really appreciate it. Your insight into the SAM profession and how things have changed with the adoption and use of SaaS, and just the explosion of software is second to none. So really thank you for your time today. I think we're going to go to a few questions now.
I did have one question come through on the Q&A panel, so please feel free to use the Q&A functionality inside of Zoom if you do have questions, and we will definitely address them. The question that came through is, what are your recommendations for how IT should manage SaaS accounts? Should every member in IT have a license to grant access for staff? Shared credentials are common here with our team, and it can get expensive if you provide licenses to all only for granting access. So across the panelists, maybe David, you want to potentially take that one and provide your thoughts?
Sure, no, I can do. Hello, everyone. Nice to virtually speak to you guys today. So in all honesty, when it comes to managing the accounts, and I understand that some organizations may actually go down that route of giving everyone access to be able to administer their own SaaS instance or change licensing models, etc. However, I would kind of treat it in the same way you would as a desktop. And by that, I mean admin rights. Make sure that your IT asset management, your SAM team owns and locks down your SaaS environment. Like I was saying in the webinar, it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole of overspend and over deploying and ending up with a SaaS sprawl. So I would suggest that your ITAM team controls that. You guys control who can grant the licenses, whether it's not, if you don't want to do it in your day-to-day jobs, make sure that you assign it to the service desk or another team, but that you have control to approve and reject various requests for SaaS licenses. That way you are fully on board with things. You have got that full control and governance around the whole SaaS lifecycle element of it. And more importantly, you then know where your spend is going and what your potential renewal figures look like as well. If you haven't kind of got that lockdown environment already, I completely understand that that's going to be a big culture shift and a big culture change. But honestly, you'll start to see a big reduction in spend, far more control, and you'll be able to be far more strategic with your IT asset management function as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. One other question that I've seen come through is sort of more relevant and timely to the world we live in right now. We're seeing a lot of activity around cost reductions and cost savings in light of COVID-related impacts. What are some of the quick wins you guys have you would recommend or work with your customers to recommend when considering looking at your SaaS inventory and optimizing sort of the changing landscape of the world we live in right now? John, why don't you take a shot at that one?
Well, well, Ben, there's an interesting thing that's happening that kind of runs contrary to the question that you just asked. PwC, the gargantuan auditing firm spread around the world, recently recommended to their software publisher clients that now would be a good time to conduct compliance audits, given that the economy, the downturn in the economy is kind of hurting their bottom lines. PwC is recommending that they get a little more aggressive now, get out there and get their auditors on the trail and start auditing people. And so we've got the view and the perspective of the software publisher, and then we've got the perspective of the software consumer. Now, remind me the question. I've forgotten it.
Yeah, are you seeing sort of additional activity around cost reductions and cost savings in light of the COVID-related impacts, or potentially are you even seeing an uptick in software adoption with companies moving a lot quicker to adopt remote tools to support collaboration efforts?
Well, there is both adoption for SaaS, for the SaaS model because of remote workers. And we're seeing predictions of how many of the remote workers during the COVID crisis are going to continue to be remote workers over the long term. And I think a couple of estimates that I've seen have run around the 10% factor, anticipating that the remote work culture is going to be with us for a long time now that employees have proven that they can be effective in remote work, or at least presumably that they're proving their effectiveness. So we're going to see that more in the future. But at the same time, we're also seeing companies having to right-size, pull back what they have in software licensing. That is very difficult under any contract, whether it's SaaS or device-based licensing. It doesn't matter what type of licensing contract they have. It's difficult to pull back on contracts when the contracts are midstream. Typically, there are adjustment periods that are built into software licensing contracts so that companies have opportunities to right-size at particular times. But in the recording, I made the point of the difference between working with the procurement team or working with the finance team. These are, in major companies, these are actually two different teams, two different departments. Finance is doing the budgeting and forecasting the financial future of the company and is responsible for the P&L statements and such. Procurement is focused just on the procurement process. When we commit to multi-year licensing contracts, often procurement doesn't have the authority to commit into the future. It requires the participation of finance. We get into these licensing contracts, and if we're not careful about ensuring that there are escape routes along the way, adequate to make business adjustments when they need to be made, then you find yourself as a company committed to a contract that you cannot adjust. It's too inflexible. So I think you get the point.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, John. And maybe, I know we're at the top of the hour, but thank you everyone for your attendance. We really appreciate it. And as I said, we will send out the recordings. You'll have all of this great content. Really, I was really thrilled to be able to be joined by John, Rory, and David for the discussion. I think there's a heck of a lot of value when we think about the transition from sort of more of a traditional software asset management focus to having all of you great professionals out there managing SaaS effectively. So thanks for the time, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.